Anyway, welcome to Chicago. Intertwined to your post of what you had going on, you know what I'm saying? Somebody had ran across and told me like, yeah, that's a official dude, you know what I'm saying? He really do his research, you know what I'm saying? He really, you know what I'm saying, dig deep on some things, you know what I'm saying? And got his website or whatever the case may be getting going. And I looked into it, I'm like, damn, you educated me on some things, you know what I'm saying? So I had to bend back, you know what I'm saying, and hit you like, man, come on the channel, you know what I'm saying, and chop it up with me for a minute, you know what I'm saying? And let's dig deep into some of the historical documents you got, you know what I'm saying? But enough of me talking, right now. Let's get into who you is, man, and where you from.
Well, I'm Zack Jones. I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, born and raised my whole life. Didn't grow up in the city, but I've lived in the city time and time again, but right in the Chicago metro area.
Okay, Chicago metro area, you know what I'm saying? What was it like growing up in the metro area? Is it like a
Um,
city?
yeah, it's mostly quiet for the most part. I came up in Romeoville, so when I first moved there, it was a little crazy, a little noisy, if you know what I mean.
Right.
But it changed a lot. It calmed down. But that's what got me kind of interested in some of this, gang culture because I was around it. I went to school, a lot of guys who were GDs, Kings. And I was like, oh, these symbols are pretty cool and all that. And then I want to learn more. And then
Right.
as time went on, I started learning even more, even the sociological aspect of it. I'm like, damn, there's a lot of shit to this.
Were you ever affiliated or associated with any
No,
of these groups?
I hung out with a lot of folks when I was younger, but I never became affiliated.
Right.
But nowadays, later on in life, I found common ground with anybody. It
True
doesn't
that.
matter what affiliation. Those are just my friends back then. Sometimes you have your friends and they're good guys, but they happen to be affiliated. You
Right.
can't help that.
Right. So tell me the concept behind your site. Is that a actual website that you have, or was that a Facebook page, or what is that you got going on with?
We got Chicago. I got Chicago Gangs dot. Sorry, ChicagoGangHistory.com, and then we also have. I'm kind of like part of a group on Facebook called Chirac. I'm sorry, real gangsters. Yeah, I have the website, the Facebook page you saw me on. So I'm part of that, like kind of administrator. But yeah, the site is ChicagoGangHistory.com. So that's the one I mainly tend to.
Okay, so tell what take me through the process of you finding information to put on the website to really, how do you, because I know it's got, do you know it is guys that are in these organizations who couldn't even tell you the history that you probably would display on these websites. So take me through the process of you finding out the information. You know what I'm saying? What are some of the things, you know what I'm saying? The red tape tackles, the research, you read books, you go on the streets, you know people, you know what I mean? Break that down for me.
Oh, there's a lot here. It comes from all angles.
True.
So some of it comes from old news articles like Chicago Tribune and such, but that has little bits and pieces. So I could take little tiny things from there. But a lot of it is I'll like being part of the Facebook groups. You see guys, they'll be talking about it. They'll be, I'll talk to them too. Talk to them about like, oh, what year this happened, how did this come to be and all that. And then you got to take your notes and compare them. I'll have notes and stuff like from articles, from what guys talk about. And then,
Right.
of course, people contact me through the site and I'll go back and forth. I've developed some good friendships and relationships with some people, just talking about history. Like my Ashland Vikings page, I connected with the founder of the organization. He became a friend of mine.
Mm.
So that's a good example right there. And over time, it's gone from more of the articles and the court cases more into talking to people and getting the
Right.
history from the guys that lived it. And it's bits and pieces all over. You might have one guy that knows some about one part of the city, but then he might know a guy that knows some about the group in another part of the city.
Right.
And then I might get connected that way. It's just so much over time, and then taking pieces of everything from everywhere. And sometimes I'll check out some of these YouTube channels, like maybe yours or something. Some
Right.
people put comments and they'll tell a story right there,
Right.
and gather it from there.
Right. True that. True that. So who are some of the people that you actually maybe came across, you know what I'm saying, whether personally or over the internet, you know what I'm saying, that you didn't probably gather a few pieces of information from, you know what I'm saying?
Well, I talked to you had him interview Stooge. I worked with
Oh,
him and he
Stooge?
helped
Yeah.
me out a lot. And then, like I said, Puncher, the Ashland Vikings, I talked to him. But a lot of guys I've talked to remain anonymous.
Right. True that.
And I respect that, you know, because they're messaging me through the site. I'm not going to poke and prod, hey, what's your real name? You know, nothing like that. Because, you
Right.
know, some people, they just want to give this stuff anonymously, and I respect that.
True
It's
that.
good to know who you talk to, but sometimes, you know, they don't want to share that.
True that. True that. True that. Do you think it's important to document the street history?
Definitely, for sure. Especially now I'm finding out there's a lot of, you know, a lot of sociological reasons that caused this, you know, the streets that have the problems they've had. And a lot of people blame the gangs. Oh, it's the gangs' fault. The gangs destroyed the neighborhoods. No, the neighborhoods were often kind of destroyed by design.
I like that.
Blockbusting,
I like that.
redlining.
You know, I like that. I like that. And something else you say, you a word you keep throwing out. So how you say that? Sociological. Define that word for me.
It's like basically like the psychology of a society is the best way to put it. It's like how people think as a group, how societies, you know, patterns of how societies function and how they behave a certain way. Like
Right.
with certain factors that come into play, like poverty, for example, that could cause certain problems in society, conflicts and such. And one of the biggest things I've found with this research is blockbusting, redlining. You know, you go in there, you deliberately change a neighborhood for profit, sake of profit. What's going to happen? People are going to turn on each other. And that's a lot of what we saw in history, especially in the 60s and the 50s. People were fighting each other. People were conflicting with each other. People were coming in from other parts of the city, just trying to make a living for themselves, just trying to get by. But, you know, they were in enemy territory or unfamiliar territory. So,
Right.
like, hey, what are you doing living here? And it's like, well, I just want to live here. And, but I discovered talking to both sides, everybody has an understanding of each other nowadays. But back then, not so much.
True that. True that. Do you think this uh sociological problem is designed?
Well, basically, trying to think of there was a book written, or maybe it was a news article. There was a man, I think it might have been in the early 70s, maybe the 60s, interviewing a blockbuster, a real estate agent, just a regular real estate guy that sold houses, and he talked about how he would go door to door to certain neighborhoods, south side, west side, knock on the door and say, hey, your neighborhood's going to change. There's going to be all this crime, all this other stuff. You better move now. And if you move now, I could try and help you out to relocate you to maybe another part of the city or the suburbs, especially the suburbs is the big catch. And that's that phenomenon you call white flight. The
Right.
white flight phenomena is tied into that big time. So that kind of depletes the resources of the neighborhood when one group of people move out rapidly, another group of people move in, and then they redline it by the banks. It could change the whole dynamic.
Okay. Okay. Now explain what is redlining?
It's kind of like where the banks pick out certain territories. I think the term comes from they would probably take actual maps probably in their meeting rooms and maybe draw red lines around it literally, but I don't know if that's for sure. But it's like drawing a line around a certain set of blocks, certain neighborhoods, and saying, look, we're going to defund this area. It's not worth our time or whatever the case is. They're just going to cut off investment.
Right.
So any kind of business owners, homeowners that live there, they're going to be denied the loans that they need that are sufficient to maybe have their home repaired or open a new business. So that gets suffocated out. That's why you see a lot of poorer neighborhoods around there because at one time they redlined them real bad and the
Right.
effects were devastating to this day.
True that. True that. True that. You really dug deep into something, you know what I'm saying? Took me to a whole nother episode or something, you know what I'm saying? That you really got to put your intellectual thinking cap on, you know what I'm saying? Get into some really critical, analytical thinking to talk about the conversation you really getting into. But uh I want to get into something real quick. Some maybe I don't know if it was a post of yours or maybe it's something on your website, you documented that I don't even actually I want to talk to you about the different sets of stones, right? I believe I've seen this on your set. I mean, I'm familiar with just about all of them, you know what I'm saying? But a few that the public don't really know about, right? You said the Israelite stones, the jet black stones, the patchy stones, and the gangster stones. You know what I'm saying? Those are like four different types of stones that the public don't hear about as much. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
me doing my little research on, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, that is a whole bunch of wow factors in there, you know what I'm saying? What is it from your website that you may have? You can tell me, we're gonna do all of them, but we can let's start with the gangster stones.
I
What do you know
actually,
about them?
oh, go ahead. I actually created a separate page for the Gangster Stones because I found that branch to be kind of the most unique and interesting, especially about the organization's founder, who they call Moose Man. I was pretty intrigued by his story, from what I could find out about him. And he passed away, I believe, about 5 years ago. So
Oh wow.
he lived a pretty good long life for the most part. Um, and it was really interesting. Like I even found his online obituary. What his family said about him, great things. A family man, a good man, and it's not just that. I've heard from people, that Moose Man was a good man, a good dude. He'd take you into his home or whatnot, and it's interesting. And they were a powerhouse in the Henry Horner homes at one time till they tore them down. And they also had a big section over there at 104th and Corliss area and Pullman. So it was intriguing. And go find out he had pretty strong relations with Jeff Ford at one
Hmm.
time. And even from my understanding, he was more like a liaison role to help settle differences within the Stone sets, or possibly even differences between El Rukins and Stones, from my understanding.
Yeah, that's real interesting right there. You know what I'm saying? I always, you know what I'm saying, try to dig deep when I find anybody that know any type of information about these different particular sets of stones, because we always hear information about, you know what I'm saying, Larry Hoover, the GDs, the BDs, you know what I'm saying? We always hear this David Barksdale, you know what I'm saying,
Right.
every so many days, but we don't hear too many about these different organizations and these different leaders, you know what I mean? And your website, you know what I'm saying? It really shocked me when I went on like, damn, wow. You know what I'm saying? That deserves, you know what I'm saying, to be on somebody's platform. Whether if that guy was a part of it or not, he really did some research, you know what I'm saying, to bring a bunch of details to light. You know what I'm saying? Now, whether every detail is true or not, I can't say that, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
I
It's
feel like
difficult.
it's a lot of articles, you got to go through a lot of different twists and turns, people, old people, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
so I get it, you know what I'm saying? But it's a real interesting thing to document, you know what I'm saying? To read, research. I mean, it should be a college curriculum if you ask me, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Because
I agree.
it expresses so many things: economical, educational, political, you know what I'm saying, social. I mean, it involves so many different things, but but yeah, you give me your idea though on that though.
I agree with you. I think it should be taught in classrooms. Definitely. I mean, Chicago gang history is a very important part of our city's history. We talk about Al Capone all the time,
True,
constantly, constantly. And I've discovered that a lot of the guys that ran a lot of these big time gangs are actually, from what I've heard from other people and everything, are actually pretty good dudes.
true.
The leader, the founder of Ashland Vikings, I've talked, Puncher, never even did any prison time. Near to David Barksdale. Barksdale went to jail, but not prison.
Right.
That's interesting. So
Right.
here you got the authorities, I'm talking about mainly the past. I'm not going to bash anybody nowadays, but back then they were trying to say these are evil men, we got to cut the head off the snake so the rest of the gang dies out. Look what happened. Instead, more chaos, more destruction, more murder. you know, these guys kept it together because they were actually true leaders, and a lot of what they were trying to accomplish was trying to do good for the neighborhood. It's hard for a lot of people to swallow. It really is, because there's people that grew up around there that have a lot of negative things to say. Oh, there were shootings all the time. But what people need to understand is when you have a gang that gets so big, you can't control all those guys. You can't even control who's coming in and out of the gang. When you're, let's say, a founder, and you got your inner circle, and maybe a guy or two says, "Hey man, can I start up my own section?" He's like, "Okay, you're a good guy." But let's say he starts one up and he takes in a guy that's not so great.
Right.
And then he goes from there, he starts other sections. And all of a sudden you've got some bad sections, you've got some wild guys, and it just, there's a disconnect. But the problem is when the authorities come and investigate these gangs, they say, well, this guy is a leader, he's the alleged founder, I'm going to sweep all these charges under him. That's basically what happened to Larry Hoover. It just swept it all under and say, you're guilty of all of it.
Right.
Even though they had no knowledge of what the hell was going on this part of the city or this night or whatnot, didn't authorize it, didn't condone it, all of a sudden, you're guilty.
Right. Who are some of your favorite authors? Who you read? What books you read?
Well, I read the Vice Lord book that David Dawley wrote. That was cool and all, because I'm like, what, this guy wrote it? You know, I'm like, but then I actually read it. It was more like an autobiography type of thing. You know, he was speaking for them. Like was Pepe Le Perry and all that. He was speaking for them like they were telling the story. And I
Right.
read it, I'm like, damn, this makes sense. I even saw them mentioning, and the book is written in 73. They're already mentioning renegade vice lords and all that. I used to, you know, back in my earlier days on the research, speaking of renegade vice lords, everyone's like, oh man, they started in 1985 by King Spot and all that. Then I read this book. I'm like, this is dated 1973.
Mm.
How are they started then? And then I go find out later, yeah, they're older. They're one of the earliest factions. So that I found cool. And not only that, the original vice lords, how they lived, you know, growing up in North Lawndale, the poverty,
Yeah.
they had nothing to do. That was one of the biggest things. There was nothing there. There weren't, you know, parks to play in, enough of that. No, not enough recreation. Schools didn't offer enough. These kids were not only dirt poor, they were bored. So they took to violent gangbanging in the neighborhood, but also it is interesting also reading about how the vice lords, the older members, the founders, grew older, and they said, "What are we doing?" It's like we're not doing anything good.
Right.
Let's try and turn this around. Let's get a community going. I almost compare it to like the Guardian Angels in a way, a lot like the original groups,
So you
because
was
they
able
would
to
just say,
guardian
hey,
angels there.
yeah, let's prevent crime.
Right.
Let's stop the break-ins. Let's stop the burglaries. Let's push out the sleazy drug dealers. You don't read about that stuff in the newspapers back in the day. You don't read about any of that. It's all about, oh, gang leaders just order hits, or they order drug deals to go down on this corner and that corner. But what about the guys that were actually trying to say, hey, let's stop that from happening? Even if some of them might have say, let's say, I'm going to control the drug trade so the kids don't get killed. I'm going to take it over. Even that, you know, has some honor in it in a lot of ways, because at least it's not out of control. But
Well,
that's what I liked about that book. You know, it was talking about how they built themselves up and what they struggled with.
was it?
Also, the Almighty Black Peace Stone book.
Oh
I
yeah, I
read
think I
that
read
one.
that. I think I read that.
That one's fantastic. I
Right.
learned a lot from there. And also another Stone book was Blackstone Rangers by Richard Sale. Another great one. He wrote that in 1967.
Mm.
So that was before anything blew up with Jeff Ford or anyone in the media much. So
Right.
that's interesting
So
to
look,
me.
to you know what I'm saying, the BO to touch on that topic real quick. I just thought about some, you know, we think about a lot of the different leaders, we hear about who looked up to who. You know what I'm saying? I used to hear a lot about how Larry looked up to Jeff, you know what I'm saying, about how I believe it was Benny Lee looked up to Larry, a lot of different gang chiefs looked up to each other at some particular point because each one is kind of older than the other and started this, that, and the third, you know what I'm saying? They knew each other for particular things of that nature. But I believe I read something about, or I never heard about it until I read it, about Jeff Fort looking up to a guy that was the leader of the Israelite Stones, which was a stone fraction I've never heard of. You know what I'm saying? And I heard he carried the 6 point star, and you know what I'm saying? And Jeff Fort looked up at him and studied on him. And I was like, I would love to know more about that guy. Do you know anything about that guy?
I believe that's Prince Yak. He was quite a bit older. Hopefully I said that right. I think it's spelled Yak. But I'm a little fuzzy about that. But yeah, he was an older guy. I believe back in 76, I could be wrong, but I think around 76, he was already in his 50s. And he was, it's something to do with like Hebrew Israelite. And that's
Right.
where the Israelite Stones happened. Now, when they put together the El Rukns in December of 76, Prince Yak and the Israelite Stones basically let Jeff Fort come to their headquarters over there, I think in the Grand Boulevard neighborhood, and meet and have this meeting.
Okay.
This is before the fort even opened, because the fort, I think, opened in 77. So it was a few months later. So that was kind of like the host of the meeting. And also, Israelite Stones, from my understanding, were kind of like mediators. Any kind of conflict that went on within the Stones, or actually at that point between El Rukns and Stones, for the most part, their organization seemed to be a lot like a mediator type of group.
Right.
That and the Moroccan tribe. But there's not a whole lot on the Israelite Stones because, as far as I know, I don't think there was any prosecution or anything like that. It was a very spiritual group. There's a lot of spiritual aspect in the Black Peace Stone Nation that a lot of people couldn't even come close to understanding. Now, I don't even have all the understanding because I'm not, a member of the organization, but
Do that.
it's also important to understand it so that people can understand this is not built upon drugs and killing.
No.
This was actually more designed to stop a lot of those behaviors. But yes, those behaviors did happen, but that was, for all kinds of other reasons. But that's not the main purpose overall. It was for a religious, like a spiritual aspect.
Right. 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 That riddle me this. Were greaser gangs the first gangs in Chicago?
See, no, definitely not. The first gangs, that would have to go back to the mid 19th century completely. But there was no names really, except for when they got to those Irish gangs out of Bridgeport, Canaryville. But there was all kinds of other things. But back then, gangs didn't last. It wasn't until the 50s that we started to build up permanent mobs. It was a whole new era. And it just so happens that the more permanent gangs came in a time when there was racial conflict. And as I said, that blockbuster, that redlining started becoming big. People having to move around the city, people
Right.
running out of the city in a hurry, and then others trying to relocate in a hurry. And it just, turned into total chaos.
Right.
And groups stood up to like try and, maintain order because a lot of the cops around there in those neighborhoods didn't care. A lot of them were from what I've heard, they're quite mean. I didn't live in that era, but I heard they were quite mean on those streets, cracking heads and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
lot of the gangs also had to form up to try and watch them, watch their behavior. Like, what are you doing? Why are you beating that man up? Stuff like that.
Right. 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 Man, you got a wealth of information over there. But look, tell me this. Do you know anything about Joe Mendowski?
I've heard that. Yeah, I heard that name. With the Latin Lovers he was working with,
Damn, the
I
Latin
believe.
lovers.
Yeah, that's where I've heard it from. I don't have a lot. I have a Latin lovers page, or I don't have it memorized, but yeah, I guess he was doing some kind of drug dealing or something like that until he got caught.
Right. The police officer. Right,
Yeah.
right. It's a few of them, you know what I mean, that had a whole plethora of things going on, you know what I'm saying? You know, in all communities, so it ain't just that guy, but yeah, you know,
Right.
so riddle me this. Do we have more proof of aliens or Jesus?
I would have no idea. But you know what? That is a good question though, because one supposedly we have physical, tangible evidence, like scientific evidence, but nobody can see it except for possibly government. But then you got the other one that I guess goes by the books.
But neither have really tangible evidence, what you're saying.
You're right. Well, you're right. It's like, yeah, they do, but they don't. It depends on who you ask.
Right,
But
right.
officially, neither.
Officially, neither. Right. Do,
Officially.
do you think NASA is really, how should I phrase this question? Owned or controlled, or is really Nazi, if you kind of get what I'm saying? Have you ever heard that? Or have you ever
I
tried
have
to
never,
connect that? You seem like a guy do a lot of research. You never heard anyone say that NASA is really controlled and owned by Nazis. That's how the name NASA actually came into
really.
fruition to a degree. You know what I'm saying? Because it's actually all Nazi scientists who work there, who study whatever it is that they claim that they study in space, because they used to do these space programs back when Hitler was, you know what I'm
Right.
saying? It's a whole nother story that deals with, that stuff, you know what I mean? But you get where I'm going though, right? You never heard that.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty much. I've never heard that though myself, but
Right.
that's interesting. But even if it's not true, I'm pretty sure at least they probably, confiscated research from the Nazis and used it. Could be.
That
I
could
could
be.
see that happening very easily. And they're not going to say anything about it if they did. They just be like, well, we found these plans. We're going to use them because think about it. If they divulge it to the public, say, we learned this from the Nazis. A, people in the public can be like, oh, really? They were that advanced. Maybe we need to bring that back. Or B, they're going to be like, you got that from there? We don't want to fund your program. So who knows if that would be connected, that'd be something top secret, I could imagine.
Yeah,
There's so
yeah.
much stuff top secret out there probably that probably blow our minds.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it'd be a lot of things, you hear and you run across, like all the pictures that are on the internet, they say that those are not actually space pictures. Like they say you cannot go on the internet and find a outer space actual picture. Because they say those are all, most of them are AI, or they're generated, or they're the Nazi giving you these pictures that not they're, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know. It's worth some research, I guess, But yeah, that's a whole total different topic of discussion. You know what I mean? And I ain't mean to get your brain, far left with it. But who you right? Pink Floyd or Jimi Hendrix?
Probably more of Floyd, if anything. I'm
Okay,
more of a heavy metal guy, but
true that.
yeah, I'd say more of Pink Floyd because their stuff's just way out there a lot of times. I kind of like that.
Right. True that. True that. True that. Hell yeah. True that. True that. I mean, yeah, and it's been good having you on here, man. You know what I'm saying? We really got a nice one in, you know what I mean? I'm definitely gonna have to get you back on again, and talk on some more discussions, you know what I'm saying? Some more topics, You seem like an interesting character, you know what I mean? And you dig deep on your history, and you got a wealth of it, you know what I mean? We broke down what about the Gangster Stones. We broke down about the Israelite Stones. And I'm quite sure. And what you say your website is again for the people that come watch it? What's your
ChicagoGangHistory.com.
ChicagoGangHistory.com. Yeah, make sure you log on to that. You know what I'm saying? If you got any cash app or anything or email anything you want to leave, you know what I'm saying? You want to say that for anybody that come watch this to donate for you, any donations?
No, I don't have anything like that.
Okay, for sure, for sure, for sure. And you being a person from the Illinois, you know what I mean, the burbs, still the city, rack, whatever we want to call it. If you could, you know what I'm saying, before we get up out of here, if it was anything you could a word you could lead the youth, what could you tell the youth out there?
I would just say definitely read up on the history. Ask the elders. You know any OGs? You know any elders? Ask how it was back in the day. Also, hey, check out my site. I've got a whole bunch of history there. Just it's good to learn about where you came from, where the organization came from. You
Right.
know, and the internet's not always going to have the best stories. Even sometimes I'm off. I got to correct stuff all the time.
True that.
But if so, ask the elders about how it was. They just ask how it was back in the day. How they handled things, how they dealt with crime in the neighborhood, how they dealt with laws, especially law and structure, all that. The constitutions, and maybe even read on it about what they were saying, what they were trying to say, what they were trying to accomplish with it, all the
Right.
versions of it. And they used to have handbook. When I was a kid, they had handbooks. One time I saw the GD handbook in front of me. It had a big old 6-point star on it. I'm like, wow, but I wasn't allowed to open it.
Right.
I was just like, some guys left it in my car, and I didn't even know it was in there. And they said, came to my door, a whole bunch of them said, we left the handbook in your car. I was like, I didn't know that. I'm like, hold up, let me go get it. Pull it out, little blue book with a star. I'm like, here you go. Yeah, I
Right.
don't think they have those anymore.
Right. 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 Okay. Okay. For sure that. And also, if you could leave a word for the old school cats or the OG out there, if you could tell them something, what would you tell the OGs out there, man?
Definitely keep on sharing that history. It's not like back in the days where sharing history was so sacred, because nowadays a lot of these kids out there are lost. They need that history. We all need that history, not just to help the kids, but to understand what the hell happened in the city, especially back in the day. There's a reason why. And a lot of these organizations came up in the same exact year. I've been finding that out. 1958, 1964, all these gangs started in the same year. Why is that? There's patterns. And a lot of that goes in hand with when neighborhoods changed,
Right.
when certain people moved out, white flight in particular, and then, new groups moved in.
Right.
And it just so happened that when those times started, organizations popped up. Why?
Right.
I've heard it before. They said that, that kind of stuff, white flight, driving out people out of neighborhood creates gangs. Well, it basically does. But also it has to be understood that the gangs there were trying to do something in a neighborhood that was lost. They're trying to maintain order, keep undesirables out, what they considered undesirables, which usually was in alignment with their neighbors. They all felt the same.
Right.
And one thing that's other important of importance is, you go to the media, you open the newspapers. From even back in the day, you'll read, they'll interview people. Oh, I'm in terror. These gangs are all over my neighborhood. They're shooting everybody. But then when I've talked to people that were not in gangs, that lived in these neighborhoods, I'm hearing a different story. Sometimes I hear the same stuff, but I'm hearing other stuff. This guy was a good guy. This guy was a good guy. This guy helped me out. And, they looked out for my kids. They looked
Mhm.
out, they escorted me across town when I was a kid and whatnot. That stuff's not talked about in
Right.
papers. That
Right.
wasn't of interest back then. And it still really isn't today.
Right.
It's all just demonizing, demonizing, demonizing. That's what I'm trying to bring to the surface, is there's another side to it.
True that.
It's really appreciated when the OGs share their stories, whether it's in the comments or something. Send me an email, whatnot. Let's get this history out there before everybody passes away. We don't have much time.
True
A
that.
lot of
True
key
that.
guys have already passed on.
Man, who you telling? Who you telling? That's why I bent on you, man. You know what I'm saying? To get some of this good documented history that you had to display, man. And I appreciate you. You know what I'm saying? I'm definitely gonna get back with you. We're gonna do another episode, man, to touch on a plethora of things. You know, there's so many things I understand and see that your mind, you know what I'm saying, is real broad. So I appreciate you, brother. You know what I'm saying? I'm definitely gonna slide back on you, you know what I'm saying? I leave you as I come with plenty much love, honor, respect, my guy.
All right, sounds good. And yeah, the Facebook group I'm part of is the Chicago Greaser group. It's pretty easy to find on there, and we talk it up good. Have a lot of good posts and everything. Real greasers. That's a good one to check out.
All right, for sure. Appreciate you. One love.